When you have somebody that listens to your podcast, that person is listening to you for 30 minutes or an hour. That's a huge commitment. And so, of course, there's going to be more people that are just willing to hit follow and maybe see your post and then close the app if they don't like it. But for somebody to listen to your podcast, that's a much larger commitment. And so, higher commitment, less people are going to make that commitment. But the people that are listening to that podcast are going to be much more quality, much more engaged.
Welcome to the Women Choosing Growth podcast, where we bring you practical advice and guidance on how to grow your business and achieve success in your entrepreneurial journey. We feature inspiring stories of success, challenges of growth, and lessons learned from women entrepreneurs, industry experts, and thought leaders who have been through the growing pains inevitable as an entrepreneur. Whether you are just getting started or are looking to scale up your business, our show is designed to provide you with the tools, resources, and community you need to grow your business. Join your host, Tina, a lifelong entrepreneur and business growth advisor, as we explore topics such as marketing, sales, finance, leadership, and personal growth, all tailored specifically to the needs of women entrepreneurs. So if you're ready to grow your business faster and smarter, and learn from the experiences of those who have traveled the growth path before you, then this podcast is for you. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started.
Welcome back to another episode, ladies. I am your host, Tina Sue, and today's guest is Jessica Rhodes. Jessica is passionate about helping online entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs without borders to leverage the power of podcast guesting to grow their network, create thought leadership content, and attract your dream clients. In 2013, Jessica founded Interview Connections, the world's first and leading podcast booking agency. The podcast interviews Jessica and her team have helped clients generate millions of dollars in revenue, sell thousands of books, and transform countless lives. Interview Connections was awarded the 2022 Bronze Stevie Award for Marketing Agency of the Year and Podcast Booking Agency of the Year by Corporate Vision magazine in 2021. In today's episode, we dive in and we cover the entire podcast spectrum, from starting a podcast, growing a podcast, being a guest on other people's podcasts. Jessica shares pros and cons, statistics to know where your podcast is standing if you have your own podcast, and strategies on being both sides of the microphone, as a guest or as a host. So let's get started. We have a lot to uncover. Welcome back to another episode. Today's guest is Jessica Rhodes, who founded Interview Connections, the world's first and leading podcast booking agency. She started it back in 2013 when no other agencies like it existed. Since its founding, Interview Connections has booked over 30,000 podcast interviews for over 800 clients. I can personally recommend Interview Connections team because they have brought many amazing guests to this very show, which makes being podcast host a little bit easier. Jessica, before we dive into all the great nuggets about podcasting that you're going to share today, I want to warmly welcome you to our show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So you started this revelation, if you will, before podcasting. I mean, podcasting has been around a while, but not in the form that it is today. And so you were one of the pioneers way back in 2013. That's a long time ago. So
yeah,
I really want to know, what inspired you? How did you get in this business? Just give me all the deets on how you got into this role.
Yeah. So I did not wake up one day thinking I am going to found a podcast booking agency. It really was one thing led to another. So before I started Interview Connections, before I was an entrepreneur, I was working at an environmental nonprofit organization doing door-to-door field canvassing. I was directing the office. So I was in a totally separate industry, separate world. And then I got married. I got pregnant with our first child. And there was a switch that flipped. And I'm like, I want to be home. I don't want to keep this job, does not fit into my life as a mom of a baby, of a newborn. And so I called up my parents and just told them, I'm going to be staying at home when the baby gets here. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for work, for an income. And my dad, he's been an online entrepreneur since I was a teenager. He started his online newsletter marketing company. He's been business coaching for a long time. And he told me about the world of virtual assistants. He says, you can be your own boss. You can have your own business. You can provide services to entrepreneurs. And I really didn't know. Like, I barely had social media. Like, I was literally outside door to door. The online world was foreign to me. And my dad was super familiar with it. So he said, I'll be your first client. I'm like, great. So my dad took me under his wing. He could not have been happier to see one of his kids getting into, following in his footsteps. So I started working with my dad in his business, doing VA tasks, lots of different administrative stuff. And seeing that I had this background in door-to-door work, he thought that it would perfectly apply to booking podcast interviews because he had already been doing some podcast appearances as a guest. And he's like, I think you'd be really good at getting me more bookings. So I just applied what I was doing door to door with this nonprofit to the online space and finding podcasts that would be a good fit for my dad, reaching out to the host, recommending him as a guest. And because this was 2013, there were only maybe 200,000 podcasts online at that time. And now there's over 3 million. So the space has grown tremendously. And when I would reach out to a podcast host and pitch my dad as a guest, every podcast host was like, I've never been pitched before.
Sure.
And like today, that's wild because you probably get pitched every single day, if not
Literally.
multiple times a day. But every host I was reaching out to was like, wow, this is cool. Like I've never been pitched before. And it kind of built up some excitement. I wanted to really find a way to scale my income as well. Because at that time I was still just a virtual assistant billing by the hour as a contract, freelancer. And so my dad helped me come up with this idea to take this service of booking podcast interviews and create a company, create something that's scalable, create packages so you could be more profitable and not just have it be based off how much time I was working, but the results, the number of bookings. So he helped me come up with the idea to create interviewconnections.com. And I started actually serving podcast hosts. So my clients were hosts who hired me to find guests. But then over time, so many more people wanted to be guests that hosts had already had so many people pitching them that they didn't need to pay for guests. So then I just flipped it and started serving the guests.
Okay. That makes sense because there is a lot. There's a lot more. What was the number of podcasts back then?
There were maybe 200,000 at that time.
It seems like a large number, but now when you think about what today is.
Yeah, it's wild. The space has grown so rapidly. And I also think it's really interesting because at that time, podcasts were not a type of media that big names would be booked on. Like PR agencies were like, that was like some weirdo in a basement talking about video games. Like that's kind of how
well, that's how it started, right?
Yeah, like that's what podcasting was. And now it's like every celebrity has a podcast. Like these are, some of the biggest interview shows are podcasts. And so it's been really legitimized and there's so much credibility in podcasts. But back in the day, it was like individual entrepreneurs were using it, but no big names, no celebrities, no huge authors. It was just this like small medium.
Mm-hmm. And there's more and more people. I just talked to a close friend last week who was like, I need to stop listening to the radio and listen to more podcasts. So like even from a consumer standpoint, that shift has made a big shift in how people are even consuming education and knowledge.
Yeah, because people can actually choose what they want to listen to. We don't have to be at the mercy of whatever that DJ wants to put on the radio, whoever's coming in for a short little bite. Like we can really sink in and really listen to a long conversation without having there be, a commercial every 2 seconds, or we can fast forward through the commercials if there are ads. But it's a platform that so many more consumers are finding value in.
Mm-hmm. So I think everyone listening knows what podcasts are, and I'm sure they're consuming some at some, space in their life. But let's go to the basics. Like, who is podcasting for?
Yeah. So, we'll narrow it into the business space because that's obviously the, kind of the audience we're speaking to. So kind of, who podcasting is good for. Really, it's any type of business that wants to create and show their legitimacy, their credibility, their leadership in a space, right? If you want to demonstrate your authority and be a leader, having a podcast or being a guest on podcasts is the perfect way to do that. So, I mean, there's a range of businesses out there. I would say if you're selling online, it's a little bit more difficult to see an ROI from podcasting when you have a really specific geographic focus, because you can't really target audiences geographically when you have a podcast. So really any online business where there's no geographic borders to who you can work with, you can leverage podcasting from really both sides of the mic.
That's interesting. I hadn't even given that thought. If I had to answer that question, I did not think about the geography. Yeah, if you have a cute little boutique downtown Chicago, podcasting isn't really helping you unless you have online sales.
Yeah, it's difficult. And of course, I mean, we won't spend a lot of time talking about local businesses. There are ways that some local businesses can get creative with how to use a podcast, but it's just a lot more difficult to see the ROI. So I usually say if you're a local business, like this medium is probably it's probably going to be difficult to see a return on your investment.
Yes. So that brings me to the question of obviously all of our listeners are entrepreneurs. So if they, like I said, chances are they're listening to a podcast of some sort. How does one decide to either start their own podcast or be a guest on a podcast? What would make someone or be both, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a book in 2016 called How to Rock the Podcast from Both Sides of the Mic. So I definitely believe and see the power in both. But almost every time, for almost every business owner, I recommend being a guest first, because most of the time when someone wants to start a podcast, they want to grow an audience. Well, if you start a podcast, you're going to need to grow an audience. So it's always good to start as the guest, in my opinion, because it allows you to get used to speaking into a microphone, learn the format of a podcast, build your network, build an audience of people who listen to podcasts, so that when you start your own podcast, you already have people on your email list following you on social media who like to listen to podcasts. So it's really good to be a guest first. And then if you want to have your own show, add it in, and you've already got this platform. You have clarity on the type of show that you want to do. The only time where I would recommend starting a podcast first is if you have a business that is so niche, that is so specific, or your target market is so specific where there's just not that many podcasts that have your target audience listening. That's a situation where it's good for you to really innovate and blaze the trail of podcasts with that target audience in mind. So yeah, any type of target audience that's like, there's not a lot of shows out there for you, well, that's a sign that you should start that you should start a podcast.
This is your sign. If you're like, that's me. This literally is your sign.
Exactly.
You said something very important in there about getting the audience, but specifically email. So I think we need to slow down on this really. I've heard it from business owners and other people of like, oh, it's about the followers, but I have a different opinion on that. And I think what you just said there about emails, tangible people that you could sell to versus, people liking your episode. Mm-hmm. Can you dive into that and what really someone who has a podcast or even being a guest on a podcast should be looking for as far as like, why am I doing this?
Absolutely. So a big misunderstanding about the podcast space, since it is so large and it grows so fast, is like, wow, this is my access point to huge audiences. And because a lot of people see like these big name podcasts out there with millions of followers, a lot of business owners want to be a guest on podcasts or start a podcast thinking that it's going to be a huge audience, when to be a top 10% show, like of all podcasts, not like these different directories that have their own rankings, but like a top 10% show of all podcasts, you need like 400 listeners, like total per episode. And so podcasts actually have very, very like targeted audiences. That's why they're effective. That's why they're powerful, is because you have a very targeted, concentrated group of people listening to your show. And so this medium is not about fame. It's not about being in front of the most number of consumers in the world. It's about getting in front of the right people. Mm-hmm. And when you focus on who, like the right people, and have the right people in the room, then you'll have a higher conversion of those listeners actually joining your email list, booking a call with you, taking an action. This is about not vanity metrics, but metrics that actually are leading indicators of your ultimate goal, which is likely to drive sales, drive revenue, increase profit, like increase customer retention. all of the metrics that we care about as business owners, that's what this is going to help with. So it's not about vanity metrics. It's about, okay, if I've got, like, Alex Hormozi talks about this on his podcast, that before he sold his company for $47 million, he was podcasting for 4.5 years with 300 listeners an episode. And then he sold his company and got really big and exploded his audience, because then people were like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. This is what he's talked about on his show. But he goes, for those 4.5 years, there was so much value because I had basically an auditorium full of ideal clients listening to me talk twice a week on my podcast. And that was a really critical part of the foundation that he grew that then led to that exit. And of course, $100 million company now. So does that answer your question?
Yes, perfectly. Because I guess I could spend all day listening to the people that have said that, like, oh, I've got these followers on Instagram. And it's like, well, that's great. Actually, but you have something to say about that.
Something else about that. Okay. This is really, really important.
Good.
It's so important not to compare Instagram followers, Facebook likes, like Twitter, like followers on social media. You don't compare that to the number of listeners that a podcast has, because there's a major difference. For somebody to follow you on Instagram, they're clicking one button and there is zero commitment. Maybe you're going to come up in their feed when they're scrolling, when they're looking at stories. But even if you do, they're spending maybe a few seconds with you when they see one of your posts. When you have somebody that listens to your podcast, that person is listening to you for 30 minutes or an hour. That's a huge commitment. And so, of course, there's going to be more people that are just willing to hit follow and maybe see your post and then close the app if they don't like it. But for somebody to listen to your podcast, that's a much larger commitment. And so higher commitment, less people are going to make that commitment. But the people that are listening to that podcast are going to be much more quality, much more engaged. So I hear that a lot. Like, I want to be on podcasts with 10,000, followers on Instagram. Well, you're comparing apples to oranges. Like, there's two totally different things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and your audience might not even be on Instagram, depending on your market. For sure.
Right. A lot of podcast listeners aren't on social media. They're listening to podcasts because they're not people that are swiping. I mean, some of the most successful, intelligent entrepreneurs, they post their stuff and then they post and ghost. They don't stay on Instagram scrolling along. And so, like, your highest quality leads as maybe a B2B company, they might not even be hanging out on social media. So yeah, it's just so
likely
important.
Have a team.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
They're not even doing their post and ghost. Someone on their team is doing a post and they didn't even know they posted it.
Exactly.
That's sometimes me. I have a great staff that posts for me. So I'm like, that's nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's awesome. So when someone does have a podcast, because I've seen the stats out there, out of the number of podcasts that are floating around in the world, correct me, I think the stat was if you have, is it more than 50 episodes, more than 100? It's a relatively small number of, like, you're in the top 20% or something like that.
The number that I heard, that is also what I heard from Alex Hormozi. I listen to his podcast a lot, if you can't tell. He says, I think it was actually the same episode where he talks about his download stats, is 90% of podcasters don't make it past 20 episodes.
20. Okay.
I'm sure there's more data for, like, okay, how many people make it past 50 episodes? But that's what we look at when we're booking our clients, is we're like, at least 20 episodes is our baseline, because if they make it past 20, they're probably in it for a longer haul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like Women Choosing Growth.
Exactly.
We're banking up on 100 in a year and a half. So
amazing.
Yes. So what is the reason for that? Like, why do people get in, think that is it the whole Instagram fame and, like, oh, I'm going to rock my business, and don't realize, like, the time commitment? Like, what do you think?
I think it's because podcasting is a lot of work. I really think it's as simple as it's actually a lot of work. It takes a long time to build an audience. People start a podcast and maybe they put out 5-10 episodes and they've got 20 downloads and they get totally defeated. And they're like, this is so hard to grow an audience. Well, yeah, it is hard, but, like, it takes time. So many business owners and entrepreneurs, they want such a quick fix. They want something that's going to grow their audience in 2 months. They want something that's going to increase their sales overnight. Like, So they're not willing to give it a while. So, I mean, 6 months, a year before you've got a committed audience. And even past that, it just takes time to grow. So I just think a lot of people aren't willing to put in the time and the effort. And yeah, it's a lot of work. That's probably it. A lot of work and money, either time or money, because a lot of podcasts have a great production company that's editing their episodes, posting it, doing the social media, coordinating with the guests. It's hundreds, if not thousands of dollars per episode to put out with a long-term ROI. It's not always, it's an investment that doesn't necessarily always bring an immediate ROI. It's a really effective brand builder, but brand building investments are long-term payoffs, not short-term advertising.
Absolutely. And I think that we'll have to hit on that like a couple times because entrepreneurs are definitely like, what's the shiny thing that's gonna, rock my business? Ooh, I heard podcasts are rocking it, so I'm gonna go do it. And then they realize like, that's not an immediate return.
Right. And you can't I can't go on Instagram without seeing somebody talk about like how I got 1,000 followers in the last 30 days. Like all of the shiny objects out there are like, here's how to grow fast. Here's how to get the result quick. When the unsexy truth of it all is takes time. It takes effort. It takes commitment. It takes putting out an episode on a regular schedule, even when you're feeling like you're lacking creativity and you don't know what to talk about. You don't feel like showing up and speaking the microphone and putting on your hair and makeup, but you got to do it. It takes pushing through. And so I think a lot of people they're like, it's not doing it for me. And then they give up. Okay.
Yep, exactly. It is a lot of work. I can say that for a year and a half of that. And like I said, I have a team that actually does the editing for me. So, but that costs money too. So
yeah, totally. And it's fun, for like, with a lot of work, it pays off. I don't mean to say like it's a lot of work and it sucks, but some of the best things in life do take a lot of work and they bring the biggest rewards.
Hey, incredible women entrepreneurs. It's Tina Sue here. I know you're juggling a lot, growing your business, managing family time, and trying to find balance. Deep down, you know you're capable of so much more, but maybe fear or uncertainty is holding you back from achieving that dream business, that dream life that you deserve. That's why I created the Dream Big, Plan Bigger guide, a game changer for your business growth. This isn't just another goal-setting document. It's your personal roadmap to achieving the impossible. Imagine having a clear vision of your biggest dreams, breaking through the barriers that hold you back, and reigniting that passion that fuels your journey. This guide is your roadmap to doing just that without compromising your family time or your personal priorities. You deserve to see your business thrive and still have time for what you love. Let's take this journey together. Download your free Dream Big, Plan Bigger workbook now at tina-sue.com and start making those dreams a reality. Now, let's get back to the show. Yeah, and you had said something about thinking about, if you've got 100 download, 100 people who are listening regularly, whether it's every episode or, whatever. Think about that if you were speaking in front of a group of people on a stage in your community. How in the world would you get 100 people in front of you, right?
I know.
You don't just like post it at the, community website and 100 people are showing up to listen to the talk.
I totally agree. And I love really like inviting listeners to visualize that when I talk about this. So I love that you brought that up because, several years ago, I was going to conferences a lot and like speaking in breakout rooms and stuff like that. And if there's 50 people in that breakout room, I'm over the moon. I'm like, this is huge. These are 50 people at this conference, very targeted audience. I would always get some leads and clients out of that. So I'm not sure why so many business owners don't see the value in an audience that size when they don't even have to leave their home to speak to that audience. Like,
right. Don't even have to wear real pants if you're on
right. But yeah, that's the power of podcasting and podcast guesting is like the ability to speak to this targeted, really solid group of people on a regular basis without having to go anywhere. It's huge.
Mm-hmm. And reach like borderless, like you said, people from I've had guests from other countries on our show to share their expertise. for people
Yes.
around the world. So that's amazing. That would not happen if I was speaking at the local chamber.
Yeah, and then networking is huge too with
Mhm.
podcasting, both as a guest and a host. Like as a host, you can do really strategic networking with choosing who you're bringing on your show. Like this is somebody I want to network with. This is somebody that would be maybe a good client. You bring them on your show as a guest. And then as a guest going on podcasts where the host would be, really solid connection. Like there's some synergy here, similar target audiences, different business models. So the networking that happens is great because if you go to a conference, you do in-person stuff, you don't always get to have these like long form, uninterrupted conversations. But that's what I love about podcasting from both perspectives, the host and the guest, is its ability to build relationships where if somebody was just like, hey, can we just like talk for an hour on Zoom? I'd be like, I really don't have time for that.
This is literally what a podcast is.
Literally what a podcast is. Like if you're going to invite everyone to listen in, I'm like, yeah, I'm down.
Perfect. That's funny. The thought of that. I would literally, if someone's like, hey, you want to just chat in the middle of the day on Zoom, probably got better things to do. But if you're going to share our conversation with the world, sure.
Exactly.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
But on the Women Choosing Growth show, we always want to have takeaway. So
For
it's not just
sure.
chatting, for sure.
Yes.
Yes. And this, I'm thinking the answer might not be a solid number because it probably depends on the goal of the podcast and the company and what it is that you're an expert in, right? But is there a certain number that podcast hosts should be shooting for downloads to know that it is worth their time and their ROI?
Yeah, I mean, I say like 200 to 300 per episode is strong. Once you have that, I feel like that's a really strong foundation that can absolutely drive an ROI in your business in terms of leads and sales and, engagement, retention. I had my podcast for 9 years. For 9 years, we did weekly episodes and now I just focus on guesting, but that's kind of the range of the size of my audience. And it was a really effective tool. I actually had a lot of clients listen to it. And so I see having a podcast as a great tool for retention because a lot of times, we do all of our marketing to get people in the door, but then how much are you marketing to your customers? Not like to get them to buy again, but to like keep them engaged and keep them, renewing and upselling and things like that. And so we would create our podcast episodes always with our clients in mind. What do we want our clients to learn? What do we want our clients to understand? And so it was a really effective retention tool. So yeah, that 200 to 300 mark is really strong. And then of course, growing it is always good. But if you're there, you're doing something right.
Right. And that takes time. Like you're not getting 200 or 300. I don't think.
Not in the first month, probably take 6 months maybe to grow to that.
Okay. Perfect. Now let's talk about the other side. We talked a lot about being the host. We talked a little bit about being a guest and being able to share your expertise with different groups of people based on, whoever the podcast host is that you're guesting.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that if people are thinking maybe this is for them.
Yeah. So being a guest, I mean, there are a few main pillars of like how podcast guesting is effective for your business. And the first and most obvious is the visibility to a new audience, allowing listeners to really hear your story, hear you speak, hear you interact with the host that they already know, like, and trust, and then inviting them to connect with you, join your email list, opt in, book a call with you. And so that's kind of the first and most obvious benefit. But the hidden benefits that a lot of people don't realize is the networking. And we've already talked about that a bit. So I won't, go too much deeper in there. The networking that happens with the host of the show is so incredibly effective and powerful because podcast hosts tend to be people that are very well connected because they're interviewing probably 5 to 10 people every single month. Maybe they're also organizing events and conferences. So they are very well connected. They might be organizing events and conferences that they could book you to speak at. But the third thing that most people are like, oh God, I didn't even think about that, is the SEO. SEO is huge. SEO is so important. You want to be coming up in Google. You want to be easy to find. You want to have a big footprint online. And so when you're a guest on podcasts, most of the time, the host will put a backlink to your website in the episode description. They'll upload the video interview onto YouTube. And so when you're a guest on podcasts, you're rapidly increasing your footprint online. You're improving your search engine optimization. You're increasing your domain authority. And you're just really strengthening your online presence, which is so incredibly powerful and effective. And most business owners, unless they have like this crazy success, like a really great SEO team, they are not doing anything with SEO. So you want to be getting backlinks. You want other websites to be mentioning you and talking about you. That's what tells Google, hey, like I've got value here. Other people can see value in what I'm doing because other people are talking about me. And then the content that gets created for you when you're a guest on podcasts is huge. I mean, content creation is something that all business owners know there's value in, but most business owners don't have time or knowledge and like, what type of content do I need to create? Where do I find the time? What type, like, am I writing articles? Am I making videos? How do I go about doing that? When you're a guest on podcast, you've got the video from the interview. You can transcribe it, turn it into articles and, quotes that you can post. A lot of times the host is giving you those clips, but you can also use things like Opus clips to just plug in and it'll edit it for you. And so my podcast appearances really fuel a lot of my content that I'm posting online.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And AI can do so much,
Yeah.
right? From that one transcript, you can have different posts, you can have article, newsletters, all the things.
Yeah.
I use AI quite a bit.
Me too.
ChatGPT is my best friend.
I was literally going to say that exact sentence. I'm like, ChatGPT is my best friend. I'll write an email and then I'll put it in ChatGPT and I'll be like, what do you think of this email?
Yeah. Can you make this a little bit funnier, a little bit?
Exactly. Yes. It's so good. And then my other resource that I love for the video clips is Opus Clip. And that's been excellent. It's like inexpensive, super effective. You could just paste in a link to either a YouTube video or a Zoom recording, or I think you can upload an MP4. And then it gives you tons of clips that you can post on Instagram. It'll give the little captions. You can even add in B-roll, so it's very, very cool. And so posting, short form clips on social media, I've been using Opus Clip a lot for that.
Okay. I'm going to have to check that one out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been great.
Yes. I wrote it down. Okay. So we talked about both sides of the table of hosting and guesting. We talked about time commitment. ROI is probably the biggest thing that I want to make sure people really take away, because even being a guest takes time, right? So
yes,
be strategic. I'm just like, people can use companies like yours. Mm-hmm. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. And so I want to talk a little bit about ROI, as you said, because it's important. We talked about like the audience size and metrics and, converting people to your email list. This strategy is really good for business owners that have a high ticket offering, because with the audience size, it's not necessarily going to drive a high volume of leads to your website. So somebody that's selling like a low ticket, $20 product, and you're seeing, you want to see a financial ROI, like you maybe do need ads or something that's going to drive higher volume. But when you have an audience of say 300 ideal client, like, dream clients in that audience, there's going to be a percentage of them that convert to your email list, and then another percentage of that who actually books a call, another percentage of that who then buys. But if you're selling like $30,000 consulting packages, $50,000, $100,000, you could close one or two clients in a year from podcasting, and return on effort, return on spend, if you're working with an agency, is still, maybe double or triple what you put into it. And so the ROI can be seen both from the sales that come directly from people hearing you. It could come from the return on effort and time. Like you may pay a company to make all these videos for you, but if you just use AI to repurpose clips from your podcast appearances, that's a huge savings. And then also really look at your ROI through the lens of, what did I learn? What value, what resources, what referrals did I get from the relationships that I formed along the way from these introductions? So the ROI comes both from a tangible sale, but also all of the intangible value that comes out of the relationships and the time saved from how you're able to repurpose the content. So I could talk about ROI all day long, but my biggest passion is helping business owners see that it's like I don't even know what the shape would be, like shapes that have multiple different sides. Like there's so many different angles to look at this through, so many different ways that you can leverage this strategy.
Mm-hmm. And I want to hit on something, because I think some people listening just probably thought like a $30,000 or a $50,000 package. We're not talking about month one. We're talking about lifetime value of a client. So when we're talking value, it's not your product might be $3,000 a month consulting fees. So it's not $30,000 a month. I just want to have people not freak out by that number, because it's really a lifetime value. If you're selling something for $1,000 a month, but that client stays with you for 5 years. Like that's the math that people need to do for the ROI. You get one client from this one podcast that stays with you for 3 years. It can definitely pay a whole year's worth of podcasting.
Exactly. And if you know that, okay, a lot of your clients then drive referrals, okay, well then that client drives a referral, which all, kind of ties back from you got on a podcast, you spoke, you got visibility to a new audience who was able to learn about you. Oh, and then one more tip that I don't think came out, but I want to make sure that we share this before we end. So speaking of sales, so one thing that I do in my sales process that I always tell business owners to do is use your podcast interviews as a way to nurture your leads before they have a sales call. And this is especially good if you have a sales team. Maybe you as a founder aren't doing all of your sales calls, or you as the CEO. Have your sales team share podcast appearances with the lead, so that way they can be nurtured by your thought leadership before they talk to a team member about working with your company. So that's just a huge tip. I mean, both for founders, like individual solopreneurs, and business leaders who have a big team that you want to use the thought leadership of the founder or the CEO, but still leverage that down the line into your team.
Yes. And we've heard it a million times, right? People buy from people that they know and trust. And knowing and trusting can happen through a video that you've never physically met or even talked to someone. So I think that's huge what you just said, because, I've like, oh, this person gets me. Never meet them. They might be on the other side of the world, but they're what they're sharing is connecting with me emotionally. So
yeah.
I love that idea.
Yeah, one of our clients actually signed up with us because the sales team, they have a SaaS company, and their sales team kept pulling in the founder to join the demos because people all wanted to talk to the founder. And so they were like, we need to get him out on podcasts so the sales team just has interviews that they can share, because he does not have the time to be on every single demo call. I'm like, yes, we need to multiply his time. Yeah.
Yes, video is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
One thing we any more tidbits before I move on to
I think that was the only one boiling to the top.
Okay, perfect. It's awesome. I love everything you shared today. But one thing we didn't share is, let's dive into like what you do for people, so that if someone is listening, be like, this is all great, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Why don't you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we are the first ever podcast booking agency. In short, we get entrepreneurs booked on podcasts. So if you're a business owner, a business leader, and you want to be getting on podcasts, don't try to do it on your own. It takes a ton of time, a ton of legwork to break through, to get amazing podcast hosts like Tina to answer your email. Not saying you wouldn't answer their emails, but you know what I'm saying?
I do. I personally answer the emails.
But it is hard to, get yourself booked. It's a lot of legwork. So we're a done for you service. So we can book you on podcasts. We provide a ton of coaching and support, interview audits. So it's a very concierge, white glove level service for business owners who really want to get on podcasts and see an ROI, because that's something that a lot of business owners tell me. They're like, I've been on podcasts, I just haven't seen the ROI. And that's likely because there was no strategy in what shows you're going on, what are the topics you're being interviewed about, what's your call to action at the end of the podcast, how are you networking with hosts. These are all the things that we help our clients do correctly so they see the ROI in their interviews.
Yes, and I can say there are other companies like yours out there now, because you've blazed the trail, so it's easier. I can say that a great company like yours is a little bit different than those that are just sending guests, because I get those too that are like, they're not a woman entrepreneur. They don't have anything that would be really useful on my show, and then I feel bad being like, no, thank you. But so I think a great agency like yours really is doing that strategy ahead of time. Like, who are you? What is it that you're wanting to share with the world? What kind of podcast would make sense for you to be on? Like, what's the ROI? Like that's the strategy piece. I can clearly see that your company does.
Yeah. And we have invested in, since 2017, local full-time employees. We have an excellent company culture. Our team members are all full-time, been with us for a long time. So when you work with our company, you really do get a high level of service. And I know what you're talking about, because I'll get pitched by companies like that. They're like, do you ever have a heart? Somebody literally emailed me yesterday and said, do you know the value of being a guest on podcasts? Like, I noticed you haven't been interviewed. And I just responded and said, LOL.
See, I would have responded too. I just want you to know that I read this.
I was like, I know more than
Here's
you.
my website. Yeah. You might want to do some research.
Yeah. Don't make the mistake of getting represented by a company that is just throwing spaghetti at the wall, like hoping that one of them will stick.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the other great thing for people thinking that this is great, like there's, you must help write the bios, I believe, and the one pager and all of the things that the host, such as me, loves having, because I have everything I need to make a decision on whether or not that guest is going to be a great fit for you, all of my audience.
Exactly. Yeah. We put together the one sheet. We put together a media kit. Doing this 11 years, we know what podcast hosts need to see to say yes easily and to be prepared to do the interview. So we're here to make the guests look amazing and to make the host job easy. And then it's a win-win-win.
Yes. Like I said, I usually don't promote, but I can promote interview connections because I do get quite a few from you and I appreciate it. And it's very specific, right? Like I'm not Joe Rogan. I can't just have anybody on my show. I mean, I could. Exactly.
Then it would just get real watered down.
Yeah, exactly. And if he wanted to come on our show, being a man, I'd let him anyway.
Always good to have the exception to the rule.
Yeah, exactly. There's a few men I'd let be a guest on our show. He's one of them.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. So I think we've covered everything. We will put all of the how people can reach you. And then you have something that you want to offer the listeners.
Yes. Okay. So we have this very comprehensive interview prep checklist, because one of the biggest questions that I get asked is, do you help me prepare for my interviews? Like, I haven't done a lot of interviews. How can I be a great guest? So we've put together this very comprehensive 4-page checklist that has what to do before, during, after the interview, all of the tips that we give to our private clients. We put that on this checklist. So we're going to have the link in the episode description. So for anyone that wants to download that checklist, just go to the link in the episode description, the show notes, and you'll be able to get that for free.
Yay. I've seen it. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any last words for our women entrepreneurs who are looking to grow their business?
Yeah, especially women entrepreneurs, please go get visible. Go get on podcasts, be visible. I am so passionate about women actually claiming their authority, claiming their thought leadership, getting out there. Like, ladies, let's go. Nobody is going to get you on the stage but you. You have to take the action. So take a step today that is going to get you visible, because we need more women leaders out there being visible, claiming our authority. It really is going to change the world.
Amen to that. Love it. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please be sure to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. The Women Choosing Growth Show is not just another podcast. It's a tribe of women helping each other grow. So please, share this podcast with all the women entrepreneurs that you would love to see succeed. If you'd like to know more about customized business advising through Cultivate Advisors, download business tools, or sign up for upcoming events, visit www.WomenChoosingGrowth.com. Once again, that's www.WomenChoosingGrowth.com. Remember, we are in this together. See you on the next one.